A discussion. Later that same day. When Michael finished telling the story, he looked around the room and saw his former classmates smiling at him. Several thanked him and said they got a good deal out of the story. Nathan asked the group, "What would you think of getting together later and maybe discussing it?" Most of them said they would like to talk about it, and so they arranged to meet later for a drink before dinner. That evening, as they gathered in a hotel lounge, they began to kid each other about finding their cheese and seeing themselves in the maze. Then Angela asked the group good naturedly, "So, who were you in the story? Sniff, Scurry, Ham, or Ha?" Carlos answered, "Well, I was thinking about that this afternoon. I clearly remember a time before I had my sporting goods business when I had a rough encounter with change. I wasn't Sniff. I didn't sniff out the situation and see the change early. And I certainly wasn't Scurry. I didn't go into action immediately. I was more like Hem, who wanted to stay in familiar territory. The truth is, I didn't want to deal with the change. I didn't even want to see it." Michael, who felt like no time had passed since he and Carlos were close friends in school, asked, "What are you talking about here, buddy?" Carlos said, "An unexpected change of jobs." Michael laughed. "You were fired? Well, let's just say I didn't want to go out looking for new cheese. I thought I had a good reason why change shouldn't happen to me, so I was pretty upset at the time." Some of their former classmates who had been quiet in the beginning felt more comfortable now and spoke up, including Frank, who had gone into the military. "Hem reminds me of a friend of mine," Frank said. "His department was closing down, but he didn't want to see it. They kept relocating his people. We all tried to talk to him about the many other opportunities that existed in the company for those who wanted to be flexible, but he didn't think he had to change. He was the only one who was surprised when his department closed. Now he's having a hard time adjusting to the change he didn't think should happen." Jessica said, "I didn't think it should happen to me either, but my cheese has been moved more than once, especially in my personal life, but we can get to that later." Many in the group laughed except Nathan. "Maybe that's the whole point," Nathan said. "Change happens to all of us." He added, "I wish my family had heard the cheese story before this. Unfortunately, we didn't want to see the changes coming in our business, and now it's too late. We're having to close many of our stores." That surprised many in the group because they thought Nathan was lucky to be in a secure business he could depend on year after year. "What happened?" Jessica wanted to know. "Our chain of small stores suddenly became old fashioned. When the megastore came to town with its huge inventory and low prices, we just couldn't compete with that. I can see now that instead of being like Sniff and Scurry, we were like Hem. We stayed where we were and didn't change. We tried to ignore what was happening, and now we are in trouble. We could have taken a couple of lessons from Ha because we certainly couldn't laugh at ourselves and change what we were doing." Laura, who had become a successful businesswoman, had been listening, but had said very little until now. "I thought about the story this afternoon, too," she said. "I wondered how I could be more like Ha and see that I'm doing wrong, laugh at myself, change, and do better." She said, "I'm curious, how many here are afraid of change?" No one responded, so she suggested, "How about a show of hands?" Only one hand went up. "Well, it looks like we've got one honest person in our group," she said, and then continued. Maybe you'll like this next question better. How many here think other people are afraid of change? Practically everyone raised their hands. Then they all started laughing. What does that tell us? Denial, Nathan answered. Sure, Michael admitted. Sometimes we're not even aware that we're afraid. I know I wasn't when I first heard the story. I love the question, what would you do if you weren't afraid? Then Jessica added, well, what I got from the story is that change is happening everywhere and that I will do better when I can adjust to it quickly. I remember years ago when our company was selling our encyclopedia as a set of more than 50 books. One person tried to tell us that we should put our whole encyclopedia on a single computer disk and sell it for a fraction of the cost. It would be easier to update, but would cost us so much less to manufacture, and so many more people could afford it. But we all resisted. Why did you resist? Nathan asked. Because we believed that the backbone of our business was our large sales force who called on people door to door. Keeping our sales force depended on the big commissions they earned from the high price of our product. We had been doing this successfully for a long time and thought we would go on forever. Laura said, maybe that's what it meant in the story about Ham and Haw's arrogance of success. They didn't notice they needed to change what had been once working. Nathan said, so you thought your old cheese was your only cheese? Yes, and we wanted to hang on to it. When I think back on what happened to us, I see that it's not just that they moved the cheese, but that the cheese has a life of its own and it eventually runs out. Anyway, we didn't change, but a competitor did, and our sales fell badly. We've been going through a difficult time. Now, another big technological change is happening in the industry, and no one at the company seems to want to deal with it. It doesn't look good, and I think I could be out of a job soon. It's maze time, Carlos called out. Everyone laughed, including Jessica. Carlos turned to Jessica and said, it's good that you can laugh at yourself. Frank offered, that's what I got out of the story. I tend to take myself too seriously. I noticed how Ha changed when he could finally laugh at himself and at what he was doing. No wonder he was called Ha. The group groaned at the obvious play on words. Angela asked, do you think that Ham ever changed and found new cheese? Elaine said, I think he did. I don't, Corey said. Some people never change and they pay a price for it. I see people like him in my medical practice. They feel entitled to their cheese. They feel like victims when it's taken away and blame others. They get sicker than people who let go and move on. Then Nathan said quietly, as though he was talking to himself, I guess the question is, what do we need to let go of, and what do we need to move on to? No one said anything for a while. I must admit, Nathan said, I saw what was happening with stores like ours in other parts of the country, but I hoped it wouldn't affect us. I guess it's a lot better to initiate change while you can than it is to try to react and adjust to it. Maybe we should move our own cheese. What do you mean by what do you mean? Frank asked. Nathan answered, I can't help but wonder where we would be today if we had sold the real estate under all our old stores and built on a one great modern store to compete with the best of them. Laura said, maybe that's what Ha meant when he wrote on the wall, savor the adventure and move with the cheese.